Hirohiko Araki was born in Sendai, Japan. He drew his first manga when he was 8 years old. He chose to become a mangaka without telling his parents, and Araki spent a lot of time practicing his art and trying to improve the most that he could. In the 60s, the career of becoming a manga artist wasn't as reliable as it is in these days. That's the main reason why Araki chose to pursue his dream, keeping it as a secret. One thing that I must really highlight about Araki is that he failed many times while trying to submit his works, but he never gave up. He was rejected until finally, in 1981, his one-shot called Poker Underarms became a runner-up at the Tezuka Awards. Once in an interview, Araki said that he was bringing a manga manuscript to Shueisha and he saw another manga artist crying as the editor was saying, "This work is boring, so I'm going to just put this in the shredder." And Araki worried about whether he will run the same sort of luck if he submit another work. So the person that we're seeing in the picture is called Mike Harper, and he's a character from Poker Underarms, the first one-shot by Hirohiko Araki. And no, this isn't Speedwagon, but it looks very similar to him. If we see the art style of this one-shot, one problem that Araki noticed back in that time is that his style wasn't very different from the rest. And as we know, Jojos have a very unique style in the manga industry, and it's one of the things that make them shine between so many other series. So now I will explain you and show you examples of many inspirations that led Araki to create this unique style that everyone just loves and made Jojos become the huge phenomenon of manga and anime industry. The first inspiration that I want to talk about is about Fist of the North Star by Tetsuo Hara. And for who never heard about this anime and manga, maybe you know the meme, Omae Moshindeiru. So after this quick introduction, I can tell you that this anime came out 3 years before the release of Jojos in Weekly Shonen Jump, and it's a post-apocalyptic manga that has an art style of characters with very large and buffed physiques. Also, we have seen many times debates about why Jonathan Joestar looks so similar to the main character of Fist of the North Star, Kenshiro. And comparing both pictures, we can see that indeed there's a lot of inspiration behind the art. Also in this Weekly Shonen Jump issue number 8 from 1990, we can see the inspiration that came from a 1984 issue of The Fist of the North Star. Hirohiko Araki himself stated in an interview that the appearance of the characters were inspired by Fist of the North Star. And it's very easy to notice this during the first parts of Jojos because of the body types that they have and how buff they seem to be. It's like if they spent 3 years straight at the gym without doing anything else, just drinking some protein. So now, the second inspiration of Jojos are the musical inspirations. Jojos are famous for the stamps, of course, and because their names and also some characters are named after many music artists, bands and songs also. We can see this in many characters like Zeppeli from Phantom Blood inspiring Led Zeppelin, Robert E.O. Speedwagon inspiring R.E.O. Speedwagon, and other good example is the battle where Jonathan met Speedwagon that happened in Ogre Street, and that name of the street is inspired after a Queen song called The Ogre Battle. There's many more examples, but it will take too much to name them all. So according to Araki, he used these names because he felt that the story had too many names starting with J. But not just the names that I mentioned before, also the character designs and covers from Jojos were heavily inspired by the music industry. And now, I will show you some examples of this. On this first picture, we can see that Yosuke's pose from the volume 21 of 2019 was inspired by a pose of Elvis Presley in Jailhouse Rock. The Weekly Shonen Jump issue 32 from 1994 was inspired by the cover of the Pearl Jam's album called 10. The Weekly Shonen Jump issue 20 from 1988 background design was inspired by the alternate cover of the album Yesterday of a band called Yes from the 70s. We can also see in these pictures that the outfit of Okuyasu was inspired by an outfit worn by Prince in the Diamonds and Pearls tour. And also Giorno Giovanna's outfit was partly inspired by a Prince outfit worn in that same tour. And talking about Giorno Giovanna, his stand called Gold Experience was inspired from an album cover of the band Asia. On Ultra Jump's issue 5 of 2011, we see Jonathan holding the world, and the design of the world came from the album cover of the band Yes. And even Araki himself used the pose of David Bowie from his album Heroes in the author's note of the Jojolion in 2013. And to finish this part of musical references, we can see that Yosuke also appears posing like Freddie Mercury in a panel from the Jojolion. The third inspiration that I want to talk about are the sculptures of Miguelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simone. Michelangelo was an Italian sculptor that was used as a main reference by Araki to be able to achieve the proportions of his characters. One good example of this is that he used the sculpture called Pieta from Michelangelo, and he made it appear in one episode of the Jojo. We also saw that he used this same sculpture as a reference for one moment of Tutorial. We can see also during a video of Araki drawing that he carries a book of Michelangelo, and one thing that I noticed during this drawing process is that he's watching one sculpture in general during this part of the video, and that sculpture is called the Tomb of Lorenzo di Medici, and we see that he used that sculpture as a reference to draw this part of the drawing. So Araki is constantly seeking inspiration in the art of the man, considered as one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance. The fourth inspiration are the fashion magazines, and these magazines allowed Araki to create his own style, and also the fact that he used so many poses from models are one of the things that made Jojos have such a unique and characteristic style that is also fun to watch, because the poses of these characters are probably one of the most iconic aspects of the whole franchise. One good example about the importance of Jojo's fashion is that in 2013, Gucci did a collaboration with Araki of their spring fashion collection that was called Gucci x Jojo. So all the Gucci shops around the world were displaying pictures of Jojo characters posing with their clothing. Araki used to work a lot with Vogue magazine photoshoots, using the poses of high fashion models as references, and for the first parts of Jojo, the main influence of the design of the characters, the outfits, and the poses were the result of the influence of two very talented fashion illustrators that I will mention now. The first one of them is Antonio Lopez, and Antonio Lopez was a fashion illustrator from Puerto Rico that worked on the Vogue magazine. Antonio Lopez and his fashion illustrations were key to the creation of many of the most popular moments of the Jojos, which added the unique style and fashion to this manga. And in these pictures of many publications made by Antonio Lopez, we can see that the poses of Phantom Blood, Battle Tendency, and Stardust Crusaders were very inspired by this artist. So now I will show you some examples of art by Antonio Lopez that appeared in Jojos. In this picture of Jonathan Joestar from Phantom Blood, we can see that it was inspired in patterns and textures in hand knits that was made for the GQ magazine in 1984 by Antonio Lopez. Also, this is another pose of Jonathan Joestar from issue 12 of the Weekly Shonen Jump of 1987, was inspired by the same illustrations. And another example of this same work by Lopez is that Jotaro's pose was also inspired by the same work. The first cover of Jojos from 1987 was inspired by Lopez too. The tailpiece of Jump Comics Volume 5 Chapter 44 was inspired by Antonio's People and Terry Riley, and Jump Comics Volume 5, another tailpiece in which appears the opposing, was inspired by Antonio's Tales from the 1001 Nights. And about the 1001 Nights, it's one of the collection that mostly inspired Araki to design plenty of his characters and outfits that they wore. To mention some examples of this, we can see the character design of Messina from Battle Tendency was inspired also by this collection. The shoes of Dio from Weekly Shonen Jump from 1995. The Abdul's character design and outfit were also based in this work by Lopez. And to finish talking about this collection, Endul was also inspired by one of the drawings. So, talking again of Lopez, he also inspired the Shisa. You know why I call him Shisa? The face of Caesar was inspired by an art of Billy Idol made by Lopez in 1986. And the last example that I want to show you is Diabolo's face and hair design that was inspired by Bloomingdale's. So we can see that this artist had a huge influence on the designs that Araki used for his stories. So if you ever wonder why the Jojos seem so stylish and wear this fancy clothing, it's because they came from the brain of these talented persons that were inside the fashion industry. And now that I finished talking about Lopez, I will show you the next person that inspired a lot Araki inside this fashion world. So the second fashion artist who influenced Araki a lot was Tony Viramontes. He was a very popular fashion illustrator and photographer. He was born in the US, and a lot of the most iconic moments from the first parts of Jojos were inspired by Viramontes. We can see in this pose of Jonathan Joestar from the volume 4 of Phantom Blood that was inspired by body-conscious studies of Terry Toy, made in 1963 by Viramontes. Also, this iconic pose of Jonathan and Caesar was also inspired by the same work by Viramontes. The volume 3 cover was inspired by a work made in 1984, and also this Weekly Shonen Jump issue of 1987 of Dio, where we see Dio posing as one of the art made by this amazing American artist. And there's even more examples like this one of Jonathan from the Shonen Jump issue 17 from 1988. This Dio's iconic pose was also inspired by the works of Viramontes, and we can see that most of the poses of the early parts of Jojos had a heavy influence by these two artists. And after part 3 was over, Araki stopped using so much references from them and tried different styles that came from a very large number of magazines that, as I mentioned before, were a key to find the style that he wanted to achieve in the future. So many of these references are seen in the following parts of Jojos, like the Josuke's pose from 1995 that was inspired by Gianni Versace Fall Winter collection. The Jump Comics volume 43 was inspired by Men Without Ties by Gianni Versace. The Jump Comics volume 32 was inspired by the Vogue Italia magazine of July of 1992. Rohan's Kishibe outfit and pose from Weekly Shonen Jump issue 41 from 1994 was inspired by Versace's Versus magazine from the same year. The outfit of Narancia from Bento Oreo was inspired by the outfit worn by Helena Christensen in the Fall-Winter collection of 1992 of Versace. Also, the Abacchio outfit design was inspired by a Gucci advertisement from 1996. Melone's outfit design was inspired by a Vogue Italia magazine from January of 1997, and an outfit worn by Giorno in a new card of 1998 was inspired by another Versace outfit from 1997. And there's more and more poses that come from magazines, like this Giorno pose that I couldn't find the source, but I found it somewhere on Google. Also, this Jolene Jump comic cover for volume 10 of Stone Ocean inspired by Versace. This other Jolene picture from the issue number 1 of 1999 was inspired by a Vogue Italia magazine photo of 1998. One of the most popular poses of Jolene and Jotaro comes from a Dior spring of the 2000 magazine. Gyros and Jonathan's pose from Ultra Jump of 2005 was inspired by Versace once again. And this other pose from both of them of Ultra Jump of 2005 was inspired by two magazines at the same time. The pose of Gyro was inspired by Louis Vuitton Fashion Spring Summer collection of 2005, and Jonathan's pose was inspired from Vogue Paris of February of 2005 too. This Jonathan pose from the volume 19 of Silver Run of 2009 was inspired by a Gucci advertisement of the same year, and Josuke's pose from the volume 9 of the Jojo was inspired by Vogue Italia's edition of July of 1984. And there's more examples of the Jojo, like this one inspired by Chloe Fashion from Fall Winter of 2007, and the issue number 3 from Ultra Jump of 2018 that was inspired by Vogue Italia. And there's more and more and more inspirations of the fashion world that if I add every single one here I will get crazy making all this editing, so let's just leave it like this. So now we can understand how Jojos were inspired by fashion magazines and the models and the poses and the beautiful outfits that they wore. It's amazing, amazing. Mwah, mwah. So now that we saw that in the beginning they were influenced by Fist of the North Star, by the work of Miguelangelo, by the musical references and the magazine references, there's another special characteristic of Araki that makes him be different from everyone else in the manga industry. And this special characteristic of the works of Araki is the coloring. And I don't know if I will say this right, but Google told me that the name of the guy that inspired Araki in this is Paul Gauguin from France. My French is trash, by the way, so don't ask me to pronounce it well, okay? Gauguin was very famous for his post-impressionism works, but he later developed his own style which he called synthetism, that consists in flat areas of color and bold outlines. And something that is very characteristic of this style is the use of unrealistic color. As an example, Gauguin will make the ground be pink or the sky gray, or he will make blue or pink trees or purple skies, whatever. And Araki stated in an interview that he was very interested in the work of Gauguin since he was a child, and he used this art style a lot as a reference for his covers, where he was always changing the colors of the characters. That's why sometimes I see confusions between new fans that they don't really know what is the original color of some characters, because Araki was always making experiments with this style of Gauguin. And now I will show you some examples of this coloring style by Araki. In these examples we see pictures of the Jojo, of Diamond is Unbreakable, Fatal Tendency, where we can see characters like Joseph being painted of purple tones with a pink background with some blue, and on one picture there's a purple tree, we see pink skies and yellow water, yellow skies and pink floor. It's really easy to notice the inspiration behind the art. One fun fact about the anime of Jojos is that the adaptation made by the amazing studio called David Production, that is loved by every single Jojo fan because of their amazing work. They implemented color shifts as in the manga, but they used them during important moments of the anime and also during the opening songs. And there's many examples of this that are very easy to spot and make the anime have his unique style just like the manga. And it's one reason of why David Production is doing such a great work with Jojos, and I'm pretty sure that they will do another great job animating Stone Ocean. So the system that Araki uses to draw, that we can see in many of his drawing videos, we see that he uses the book of Miguelangelo as a reference to make the bodies first, and after he does the dimension of the bodies, he starts seeing the poses and the outfits from fashion magazines. So after Araki is done with the face, he paints his drawing using the style of Paul Gauguin that I showed you before. So how the art of Araki evolved throughout the years? Because we saw that when Araki started working in the first Jojo part, we saw the influence of Fist of the North Star, as I showed in the beginning of this video. Characters were literally mountains with very exaggerated muscular bodies that if you compare during the first 3 parts of Jojos, you can't really see the difference between the characters. Jotaro is a very good example to show how the body shape drawing style of Araki changed a lot. We can see how the buff Jotaro from part 3 was converted into a more skinnier Jotaro that looks more like an average person on part 6. And if we talk about Jotaro, we have to mention Yosuke. His body is very thin compared to every other Jojo in the franchise. So back to the 80s, Araki was influenced a lot by the body type that was trending in those days. I mean, it wasn't completely in every single anime of the 80s, but plenty of the most popular action animes from back then had main characters with this body type. Many examples of these kinds of main characters could be like Ryoseba from City Hunter, Goku from Dragon Ball Z, Kinnikuman, that the main character is called Kiniko, I think, or is Kinnikuman, whatever, and other mangas like Cyber Blue, Otokojuku. And if we compare the manga drawing and the shadowing style, we can see that this kind of drawing style was used a lot by Araki in his early work. In this photo comparing Phantom Blood to Cyber Blue, we can see the similarities in the art. Although Cyber Blue was released 1 year after the first part of Jojos, but it's a very good comparison about this style for manga drawing. Another very similar detail that I saw between Araki and other mangakas is the face style. We can see in this comparison of Joseph's face from Battle Tendency versus the one of Tsurugi Momotaro from Sakigake Otokojuku from 1985 that they look very similar. And let me ask you one question. Can you guess which one is Joseph Joestar from this picture? The answer is the guy on the right. But there's even more similar characters of Jojos with the ones of this manga series from 1985 that I mentioned before. We see a very huge similarity between Polnareff with Senku, and also Jotaro reminds me a bit of Togashi Genji, but it's mainly because of the face shape and the hat probably. And back to this conversation of the drawing style of the 80s, we can also add to this comparison the masterpiece of Kentaro Miura. Rest in peace, Kentaro Miura. His masterpiece called Berserk, and Miura once said in a Crunchyroll interview that his fantastic manga was also inspired by Fist of the North Star, just like Jojos did back then in Phantom Blood, so it's understandable that they have some similarities in their first art style, although I personally consider that Miura had a most distinctive drawing style that made it look different to other mangas. I'm not saying that the other mangas were bad, but Miura is an amazing artist, just like Araki. So the manga industry always changed a lot through each decade, and as the industry changed, Araki had to adapt his art and evolve his drawing style to don't be stuck in an old time machine. Examples of older art styles of mangas can be Astro Boy of Osamu Tezuka from 1952, and in this kind of art we can see the inspiration behind Disney. And also if we compare the first manga of Araki, we see that the same drawing style of Astro Boy appears to be made by him. Because if we remember, back in the 60s there wasn't many manga artists that had a reputation, and one of the huge names for the industry was Tezuka, that did a lot of amazing and memorable stories. That's why many times we hear that Tezuka is called the father of manga and also the god of manga. He did many memorable stories like Dororo, Buddha, Blackjack, Kimba the White Lion, Princess Knight, The New Treasure Island, and obviously Astro Boy, one of the most recognizable franchises of all the history of the manga industry. Okay, I got distracted talking about Tezuka, my bad. Now I will keep talking about the old mangas like The Rose of Versailles of 1972. We already mentioned Fist of the North Star with the old characteristic buff body type. And on the 90s we saw the influence of series like Sailor Moon that made the character's face look more long, with more pronounced chins. And it was very characteristic from the 90s to see these characters with long chins. And on the next decades, everything became circular. We've seen examples like the iconic Full Metal Alchemist, Kimetsu no Yaiba, or Boku no Hero, that the faces got very circular and the characters also are each day more and more thin. And now that we see that the industry changed so much in these years, why everything ended up being so skinny in JoJos and anime in general? Well, my personal opinion is that it's just a part of evolution. The interpretation of beauty is always very subjective and changes a lot depending on each generation. And we can see this just comparing some of the different body trends of women throughout the last centuries. A good example of this are the Gibson girls, inspired by the illustrations of Charles Dana Gibson. Then we see the trending body type of the 80s with these athletic supermodel bodies that were a fashion trend. And if we compare the images, we just see the difference and how the aspect changes a lot. And it's just something natural. Everything has to change at some point. Even if we go more behind the 20th century, we see in all eras like the ancient Greece and the Renaissance that the most chubby body types were the standard of beauty. So in these examples is where we can see how things can change throughout decades and centuries due to the changes inside society that lead to change our interpretation of how an attractive body type should look like. A good example of this in the manga industry is Lily Oshino's drawing style progression during 27 years of development. This edit is able to show us how the art of one artist can change throughout the years. We can see at first a more circular drawing, then if we get straight into the 90s, we see how the face shape start getting a bigger chin that takes form during her work, and we see how slowly the drawing style and the curves get more circular while the years approaching to the 2000. And we can see also how the artist improved and got better and better thanks to all the years of constant practice and effort. Another good example of how the art changes that I can give you is the one of Hajime Isayama, creator of Attack on Titan. We see that he lacked the use of shadows during his early work, and his drawing style was very simplistic, something that really made the manga fans criticize Shingeki as a manga during its early days, because the art style of Shingeki wasn't at the level of many other mangas at the market. So we can see in this picture how Isayama greatly improved throughout the years until he was able to finally deliver more realistic details to his drawings that surprised many fans across the world that follow his manga for over 10 years. There's so many examples of redraws that he did during the final panels of the manga, but I won't spoil you anything about Shingeki, so don't worry. In Araki's case, we can also see a huge change in his art style that went from an overshadowing into a more neutral use of the dark tones, something that is vice versa from what happened to Isayama. As we saw before, the characters lacked this shadowing until he improved his drawing skills. In this picture, we can see how Araki stopped using an excessive shadowing for his art, and he improved his skill and talent to draw human bodies and faces that we can see how realistic they look in the last episodes of the Jojo. Bento Aureo was the beginning of Araki's new era of body type designs that were more thin and less muscular than in the 80s and the 90s. Although some critics started saying that Araki made the faces look too similar and he had the same face syndrome. And examples of this can be seen in many edits made by the fandom like this one. But even if it seems to be true, it's a fact that inside the manga stories this doesn't work like this, because each character is easy to difference and they don't look so similar. I think the main problem of this is that Araki uses pretty much the same kind of pose on these covers, and that's what creates the effect that makes everyone look the same. But in the actual manga itself, they don't look like this, and we can see it in many panels like this one. So after this explanation based on reality, I will give you now a Jojo based explanation. So we know that Araki used to work with characters that had to train a lot to gain more power and strength. We can see in this part of Battle Tendency that Joseph is training very hard with Shiristar to achieve more power. And obviously if you train so much, you will get more and more muscular. So it's understandable from the story perspective that the characters had more muscular body types before, because to use Hamon they had to train so much to gain this power and practice their breathing. And when Araki changed his formula into the stance, we see that the characters don't really require to use their bodies most of the time. So even if they use strength still and they have to fight people sometimes physically, I think the kind of training that Hamon required was overwhelming, and it's the main reasonable explanation of why the early stage of Jojos had so many muscular body types instead of the ones that we see in the last parts of the story. And this is the most logical explanation that I see to Jojos from the story itself. And now that the road is finally over, and I already showed you all the inspirations that I found while doing all this research for this video, I like to mention all the recognition that Araki has achieved thanks to this unique style. He has done many collaborations with high-profile brands, and he was featured in an exhibition at the Louvre, and he also did a one-shot special about one of his most popular characters from Diamond is Unbreakable, and also his alter ego called Kishibe Rohan. And in this story he visits the museum and tries to solve a mystery about a cursed painting. I remember back then I wanted to buy this as a gift to my girlfriend because she's also a Jojo fan. I never bought it, but I have to buy it at some point of my life. So many companies like Lamb, Bands and Jam Homemade have worked with Araki to create Jojo merch. For the debut of part 5 of the anime, Bandai released a Ladybug Ring of Gold experience, a Sticky Fingers bolo tie, and special editions of sneakers inspired by Giorno and Bruno. There was also a special event where Jojo collaborated with Mercedes-Benz in 2019, and in this picture we see the voice actor of Pucci in Eyes of Heaven posing next to the car. Araki also did a collaboration with Gucci that I mentioned before back in 2011, where we see the event featuring a collaborative comic called Rohan Kishibe Goes to Gucci, used to celebrate the 90th anniversary of Gucci and the 30th anniversary of Hirohiko Araki. And as we see in the pictures, there were many Jojos appearing in magazine covers and also in many events with panels that Araki drew with the Jojos posing with this collection of Gucci. And Araki also was chosen to create a poster for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. And by looking at the poster, you can already understand now why he draws like this with all the explanations that I gave you. We see the Gauguin painting style in this poster, and I'm really happy that Araki is receiving a lot of recognition, and it's something that he really deserved for all his work throughout the years as a mangaka. Because of the stories, amazing stories, the character designs, the poses that are so iconic, and there's so many other series making references to Jojos due to this. The list is so big that to put them all on a video I will need to use another video of 1 hour, but some of the references that I can show you are Gintama, Norin, Kiss Him Not Me, Pokemon, Food Wars, No Game No Life, Fairy Tail, and Mob Psycho 100. And there's even more references out there waiting to be done. So literally everything is a Jojo reference now. And talking about Jojo reference, what about the Jojo memes? I mean, even non-anime watchers might understand Jojo memes and the references to the anime due to their huge popularity. I'm pretty sure that most of people know the Giorno Giovanna theme music because of the memes, and they don't even know what Jojos are maybe. So with all these facts we can understand how incredible is the Jojo franchise, and after this very long video talking about the inspirations and the evolution of Araki to become the respected artist that he is today, I hope to have helped you understand a bit more about how this talented person created his unique style and how his stories and art have been influencing our society for over 3 decades. So this is it guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in more Jojo material and other animes and mangas like Attack on Titan, Chainsaw Man, The Promised Neverland and many more, be sure to subscribe to my channel. So as I always say guys, thank you and see you soon.